In its enlarged second edition, author, researcher, scholar Christopher John Berkness has available now The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. That's a book, 575-page book. The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. This is another one of those genocidal issues that 99% of Americans will never know about, probably don't want to know about. They just care about their day-to-day toys and whatever else it is keeping them busy. But the list of genocides that human beings have perpetrated against other human beings is so long and so ugly. It's really almost too much for people to believe. What got you involved in this, Chris, the whole idea of the Jewish genocide of Armenian Christians, which happened, well, give us a time frame.
There were several phases to it. Under the Sultan of Turkey in 1894 to 1896, about 300,000 Armenians were massacred throughout the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. And then when the Young Turk Revolution occurred in 1909 and 1908, and there was a counter-revolution briefly in 1909, they massacred some Armenians to again bring the Sultan into disrepute. Mm-hmm. And then during the First World War in 1915, there were orders issued by Talat Pasha to exterminate all Armenians, men, women, and child.
That was the bad one, the biggest. They're all bad, but that was the one that I'm familiar with. I did know there were parts to it. I had someone on years ago talking about this, and it's something that did occur over a number of years. I know, I remember that.
And then there were lingering massacres up until about 1923, when most of the Armenians were secured when they became a Soviet republic in the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. But as you say, the principal year was 1915, and the estimates vary from about 800,000 to about 1.5 million total over the course of all those years.
Right. This occurred during World War I, so it wasn't something that had a real good chance of making the New York Times regularly.
That's very true, and that they stated at the time that they would be able to get away with it because they had the screen of the war to do it under.
Right.
And they also had the help of the Zionist press to help cover it up because the Zionists were in large part behind it.
So what was the deal? Why were the Armenians targeted? What did they do to offend Zionism and the machine that was the dying days of the Turkish Empire?
Well, this is very relevant to what's taking place today throughout the Middle East, throughout the world, really. But what the Armenians did was they afforded an opportunity to pit Europe and America and Russia against the Turkish Empire by providing a pretext. And the slaughter of Christians that was apparently done by Muslims in the Turkish Empire afforded them the opportunity to vilify the Turkish Empire and to provoke the Balkan Wars and ultimately the First World War. And it also provided them with a means of discrediting the Sultan among his own people, such that it aided them in their efforts to have the Young Turk Revolution. And the reason why they wanted to destroy the Turkish Empire was so that it could be partitioned into small, segregated, ethnically based nations, much as Zionists today want to partition Iraq into small, ethnically segregated nations.
Well, we call it balkanizing too, whatever. Yeah, chop it up, divide and conquer.
That's exactly it. The balkanization of the Balkans is part of the process of the dissolution of the Turkish Empire.
And Iraq is to be cut into at least 3 pieces. And in fact, pretty much already is, to a substantial geopolitical degree.
Yes, and it's going to lead, unfortunately, to problems because the Sunnis are going to be cheated out of what they would have had it not been broken up.
They know it too, yeah.
And the Sunnis have strong allies in the Arabs, so this could lead to strife between the Arabs and the Persian Iranians, who represent the Shiite population, which controls most of the oil districts.
Right. Well, it is leading to strife. A lot of the fighters apparently come from Saudi Arabia. They're fighting with the Sunnis.
And the media underreports that fact and tries to lay all the blame on the doorstep of the Shia.
It's the Zionist media we're talking about again. Same old story.
Same old story. Same old story. Vilify, create internecine sectarian strife, and then use that as a pretext for war. And that's what happened with the Armenian genocide. There were other issues involved. As in the Bolshevik Revolution, they wanted to destroy the intelligentsia so that there would be no opportunity for counter-revolution.
Right.
And the Armenians were widely renowned as being the intelligentsia of the Ottoman Empire. They were the ministers, the administrators, and the leading elite and the wealthiest class.
Go for the brains. That's why so many Iraqi professionals have been liquidated. You don't hear about it over here. Assassination teams have wiped out thousands of professionals, and many of the others, of course, have fled for their lives among the 4 million refugees of Iraq. You go after a country, you literally destroy its brain, as it were, and then treat the rest like cattle. The lower classes, the undereducated, the underprivileged, and not hard to do. It's a formula, a tragic one. All right, back with Christopher John Berkness in just a couple minutes. The Armenian genocide, another terribly ugly chapter in human evolution, devolution, accent on the devil, I guess. The issue of the Masonic involvement seems to be never far from any major catastrophe or world event, and I guess there was a Masonic influence on this. Tell us a little bit more about that, if you would.
Yes, one of the powers behind the throne of the Young Turk government was the Committee for Union and Progress, and it was headed by a man named Emanuel Carasso, who was a Sephardic Jew from Salonika, and he had connections to Freemasonic Jewish leaders in Italy, and the Young Turk movement was patterned after the Young Italy movement that was founded by Mazzini. And one of the things that Carasso did was to establish a Masonic lodge in Salonika, and he did it in a building that was owned by an Italian so that the police could not raid it without a warrant or even search it or survey it without a warrant.
I see.
And he became Grand Master of the Macedonia Resorta Masonic Lodge. And
he appointed himself, sort of?
Yes.
Sounds
well,
like
he had all the money, so he got to make the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one who, through his cousin, who was Maitre Salam, brought financing into it. And another figure who was a Freemason and what is known as a Durnmei, which is a specific sect of Judaism which has been rejected by all other sects of Judaism. And this was Javid Bai, and he became Minister of Finance, and he also brought lots of financing into the movement. And the head of the open government was the Minister of the Interior, Talat Pasha, who was the head of the three Pashas. And he was also Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodge of Constantinople. And the interesting thing is that in 1910, there were many dispatches from the ambassador from the United Kingdom to the Ottoman Empire, Sir Gerard Lothar. And he pointed out and laid bare that all the names and all the involvement of Freemasons and the Salonican Jewish community in the revolution, and he characterized it as a Jewish takeover, not as a Young Turk revolution.
Oh.
And he pointed out that the objective of it was to destroy the Turkish Empire in order to make room for the colonization of Palestine.
So bankers destroyed the Turkish Empire, Zionist bankers.
Absolutely. They deliberately destroyed it, and they deliberately provoked the First World War in hopes that there would be a peace conference at the end of the First World War where they could establish the League of Nations, create the Palestine Mandate, and make room for this peace conference. And since the Jews became involved in Zionism through President Wilson and other ways, that they would then have the right to send a delegation to this peace conference and make their petition for the Palestinian state. So all this mayhem was the product of Zionist bankers who had an interest in establishing conditions where the empires would be destroyed. And another element of the First World War that was significant to them was to destroy the Tsar's empire so that the Jews in the Pale of Settlement would be freed up for emigration to Palestine.
Oh, I see. The plan was in the works long before the Balfour Declaration, then.
Oh, much before.
Mm-hmm.
And we have documentation that in 1903 at the Zionist convention that it was recorded that Max Nordau said that they would indeed have this world war so that they could have this peace conference where they could make their petition for the formation of a Jewish state in Palestine.
Mm.
And that, again, was patterned after Mazzini's Young Italy movement.
Well, this is all going back to the Rothschilds, of course, who probably planned the whole thing.
The Rothschilds had been planning it, I would say, since at least the 1820s. They made, through Protestant ministers and other organizations, many, they tested the waters before they jumped in. They put out the idea that they had the means to purchase Palestine from the Turkish Empire, and they wanted to know how the Jewish community would react and how the Arab community would react and how the Roman Catholic Church would react.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever they did this, they discovered that the reaction was negative. The Jews were very much against Zionism. The Arabs would not have permitted it, and the Roman Catholic Church was against it because the Roman Catholic Church had designs on Jerusalem for itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the means that the Zionists used to overcome all of these objections was to create the political Zionist movement so that it could not be confused with a religious movement,
mm-hmm.
and to ramp up anti-Semitism throughout Europe so that the Jews would feel an incentive to move to Palestine.
Got it. I knew that. They basically tried to create an environment which they would want to leave Europe. They would want to flee for their lives, basically.
Yes, and they also promoted many racist theories to make the Jews desperately concerned that the Jewish race, so-called, was disappearing due to assimilation. They were very anti-assimilationist, and they would break down the good relations between Jews and their neighbors in Germany and other countries by openly declaring that they were a hostile foreign nation within that nation.
I see.
So they also provided ammunition for the anti-Semites to persecute Jews, and the anti-Semites and the Zionists had a league that had been going on for a very long time, at least since the time of Herzl in the 1890s.
It's very hard for people to understand that it's like if you put everything together, Zionist, Jewish, whatever you want to call it, take out all the anti-Jewish elements of it, what you're left with is the real problem, and that's Zionism. It's nothing to do with Jews per se or Judaism, but they've used that and abused Jews for how long? How long have they sacrificed Jews for their own ends? Long time.
Well, it goes all the way back into the Old Testament. That the jealous God would become enraged if the Jews were to intermarry with other peoples, because that would lead the Jews to worship other gods. So the God demanded that any Jews who did that must be immediately killed. And the Zionists interpret that to mean that they have the right to persecute other Jews in order to keep them from leaving the faith.
Burnt offerings.
A Holocaust.
Yeah, all right. Hold on back. One more segment to go with Christopher John Berknes tonight, and he has created some very controversial but extremely well-researched books on history, which we really should study if we want to learn anything, but, you know, how few read anymore. But remarkable books, and the Einstein book has always been interesting to me. I've heard about it several times in the past, so it's great to talk to the author. Be right back with more, just a few minutes.